So welcome back, everybody. Again, this is Startup Happy Hour. My name is Jeff Bennett. I am the co-founder and president of StartupSac, and this is a monthly event where we try to introduce a little bit of networking, which you just experienced. And the other main option or portion of this event is we bring in a veteran founder. Here you can see when we used to do this live and in person, we would bring in a veteran founder to basically tell their background, their story, and then turn it over to the audience to get their questions answered from somebody who's been there and done that. So, but right now we're doing this virtual, and we'll continue to do so until it's safe to meet again in public. All right, so this event and the other things that StartupSac does would not be possible without the help of our sponsors. So we would like to give a quick shout out to our annual sponsors, who are SMUD, Witten Law, Bender Insurance Solutions, Nivagen Pharmaceuticals, Stoll Reeves, Weintraub Tobin, Holcomb Law Group, Clifton Larson Allen, Moneta Ventures, and Ernst & Young. And I'd like to give a special shout out to SMUD, who was a platinum sponsor, and play this short 30-second ad about their clean energy initiatives.
My friends and I think about the future a lot.
And it's looking brighter.
Because SMUD's improving our air,
helping the planet,
and using technology and new ideas to power healthy communities,
where we can all live, work, and play.
By 2030, SMUD will be 100% carbon-free, so you can live in a clean power city. Join the charge with SMUD at cleanpowercity.org.
Oops.
My friends
and I. Thanks to SMUD and to all our sponsors. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to get to the main portion of the event, where we will welcome Pam Marrone from Marone Bio to the virtual stage, along with Cameron Moth. So I'm going to let Cameron, I'm going to spotlight you and Pam, and we'll let you take over from here.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, thank you, Jeff, again for the introduction. And it's my pleasure to be interviewing Pam Marrone here today. And just to get us started, I want to provide a little bit about her background, and then we'll jump into some of our Q&A, and want you to start thinking about some of the questions you have for her as founders. But as I shared, it's my pleasure to introduce and interview today at the Startup Happy Hour, Dr. Pam Marrone. Dr. Marrone spent her 30-plus year career focused on biological products for pest management and plant health, having started and led 3 different companies. In August 2020, Dr. Marrone retired as CEO of Marone Bio Innovations, a company she started in 2006 and listed on the NASDAQ in 2013. Marone Bio Innovations is a pioneer in developing effective, safe, integrated pest management solutions for crops, row crops, and water treatments. And she remains on the board of directors and as an advisor to the company. And she is the treasurer of the Association for Women in Science, on the board of the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and is a senior fellow of the Arizona State University Sweet Center for Sustainable Food Systems, and is the past alumni trustee of Cornell University. So we're in good hands tonight with Pam, and I can't wait for her to share her experience in founding, growing, and IPOing a venture. And so just want to kick us off with an initial question, and it goes back to one of the first times I heard you speak, Pam, was at the Carlsen Center, and you were on a panel there, and you talked about your love for science. And so would love to kind of just go back, and I know part of your upbringing was being a science and having that passion for it as a kid. So would love to learn a little bit about your background and what led you to starting Marone Bio Innovations.
Yeah, I did grow up on a beautiful place in Southern Connecticut on 40 acres. My mom's turning 95 on Thursday. She's still there. And I just fell in love with nature, and there were problems with bugs, gypsy moths, and wanted to learn how to control those. My mother showed me some journals from Audubon, and it was the time of Silent Spring and DDT, and the pesticides being banned because they were harming wildlife. So I really got interested in how we were going to change the practices. And so I said, I'm going to go to school, learn how to do this. Became an entomologist, and then realized that academia was not my cup of tea. I didn't want to just do research. I wanted to create products. And so started my career with Monsanto Company. And they, right out of school, in St. Louis, they wanted to start up a new unit looking for new ways to control pests without the use of toxic chemicals. And they wanted to put that legacy in the past and asked me to just start up doing whatever I wanted. And I ended up getting into this and way ahead of my time, looking for microorganisms that produce compounds, just like penicillin comes from a mold, and your antibiotics come from microbes, and looking for those in nature. And I've been doing it ever since. 3 companies later: Entotech, AgroQuest, and Marone Bio. So, pursuing a lifelong passion, and still finding ways to transform agriculture with biologicals that are provide a more ecologically sound ecosystem. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that context, Pam. And it sounds like you were doing corporate innovation before corporate innovation was really a thing, and that led to. Were any of those of the 3 companies? Were any of those spin outs of Monsanto, or were those just new ventures when you decided to take your own leap?
So Entotech was a subsidiary of Novo Nordisk that I created from scratch, and they hired me from Monsanto and we looked at places around the country where to locate. We looked at Research Triangle Park, Raleigh area, and looked at up in the Pacific Northwest, and they chose Davis, and that's how I moved here from St. Louis. And they said, start up a company. This was because Denmark-based Novo Nordisk found that innovation was really hard to do internally. And if you know the Danish Scandinavian culture, Janta law, it means everybody has to be the same and nobody can stand above. So a tall poppy gets cut off, or a tall nail gets hammered down. So they wanted to do innovation outside of the main corporate headquarters, and where their R&D was. And I was actually started the first subsidiary dedicated to R&D outside of Denmark. And it wasn't easy because of the cultural differences. So did that for 5 years, and set up in University Research Park was the first tenant, built the first building. And then 2 years later, Novo Nordisk said, oh, we think this is great. We really like this, what you've done in Davis. So they set up a new unit called Novo Nordisk Biotech, and I helped them do that right next door. That's still there, and it's called Novozymes Biotech. But our unit, Novo Nordisk Entotech, was sold to our large competitor because of the cultural differences. They felt that, first of all, we were way ahead of our market, and there was going to be able to have to spend too much time creating, changing paradigms, and that's not something they wanted to do in trying to get farmers to change from chemicals to biologicals. So. And it was too tough, and also the cultural differences between setting up a freestanding subsidiary was too different. So when they set up Novo Nordisk Biotech next door, now Novozymes Biotech, they changed the model and said, no longer will we have this freestanding subsidiary with its own president. We're going to have the head of it be a divisional director and be a unit of Denmark. So kind of speaks to that Janta law culture. They learned a lot, but anyway, so after that, they sold us to our largest competitor, and then started AgroQuest, and that was a venture capital back. So I had to raise all the money and raise 60 million for that, and that was sold to. I left when I left right. Let's see, 2006 to start up Marone Bio. When I was taking it public, AgroQuest public. A lot of people know the story in the region, but unfortunately it was right before 9/11, 2001. And so the offering didn't get done. And then a new investor came in, took over, and we didn't agree on the strategy for going forward. So I left and started up Marone Bio, and AgroQuest was sold to Bayer Crop Science for almost 500 million in 2012. So, and then so each time getting better and better, honing the way to do things and learning from past experiences. I'm almost, Marone Bio is a great company, but there's some things I still would like to do differently or even better. You always want, and this, I talk to lots of entrepreneurs, and that's why you become a serial entrepreneur, because you do it again, and then you do it again better, and you learn stuff each time. But then what's interesting is that the company you create becomes independent of the founder, it becomes an entity to itself. And then you have little control over it. It just becomes this organism, and it's really hard to control because it's gotten bigger and so forth. And then you realize there's more things you want to do with it, but you can't, because it's got new people and new people controlling it and so forth. So then you go and you start up again. So I may actually have a couple more startups in my future.
Well, I wouldn't doubt you on that one with the track record. So that's
just taking
awesome.
A temporary break. And actually, I would hire a CEO, and I would be the chairman.
There you go. I love it. Well, definitely you're demonstrating the entrepreneurial mindset of continually learning and applying those learnings for future endeavors, and love the mindset of, serial entrepreneurs want to do it better the next time. And I could see that. I wanted to go back to one thing you were talking about, kind of you were almost too early to market, it felt like, in terms of you had to change the paradigms with farmers. And so that makes me think of kind of when I hear a lot of entrepreneurs, they have some solution that they want to bring to market, but they haven't really understood the problem that they're solving, right? So they have a solution and they're hunting for the problem that they're solving. Can you take us back to, maybe when you actually found that sweet spot of where, you actually found that problem solution fit and then got into that product market fit, and what that looked like and maybe how you got there?
Well, yeah. So our industry is dominated by chemical pesticides, and there definitely was a need to find first of all, chemical pesticides don't do everything. So there's a perception that they do, but there's a lot of unmet needs in the market. So the idea was to find those unmet needs, and the early adopter innovative farmers who would like to try a biological solution, ecologically based solution. But it was really difficult it was way ahead of my time, because our products are great for organic, although 70% of our products are used by conventional farmers who do use chemicals. But the early adopters are the organic farmers, but the organic was only a couple 100 million food market, and now it's 50 billion. So I mean, in that time, it's grown. It's a juggernaut. And so I didn't have, even in the organic space, didn't have many of the early adopters. So I was a bit ahead of my time. So I had to change the way the products were used. So instead of saying I'm going to substitute a chemical for my product, I said I'm going to integrate my product in with what they're already doing and show them that I can make their whole program system, their whole farm program better. And so that was the paradigm change. Now everybody talks about integrated programs. That's become the state of the art. But I found enough customers who were both farmers and distributors who said, "Okay, Pam, I'll give you a chance to show on the farm with some demo plots with the customers what your products can do," and indeed showed that it could make their program better when integrating in our solution. So that's how I was able to get over that, but it was definitely not easy. Year by year, though, more and more farmers are adopting this, but still we have a ways to go, because the awareness and the education and knowledge of learning a new solution is where there's still some barriers. Yeah.
Well, it sounded like one of the big shift was in language. So moving from, we're gonna, how can we help you change what you're using versus how can we integrate into maybe your portfolio of pesticides. And so part of that makes me think of, the value proposition you're offering, and language is really powerful, because, if you think about changing, it was like, oh, you're making me do something, even though it might have positive rewards, but I have to do something, versus integrating. It seems like you'll be doing the work. How did you come to that realization that, certainly, maybe you were laying in bed and it popped in, but I would imagine that was through some sort of customer development. And what did that kind of journey look like, from learning from these farmers and your customers to actually integrate that shift in your language to talking to them?
Well, it had to do with the distribution channel, because if I sell through distributors, there's an oligopoly of distributors that are quite large that control access to the grower. And so to go to those distributors and say, well, stop selling this chemical and sell my product, which is unproven and it's new, new technology and nobody's heard of it, from a little company in Davis, it was really not realistic. So if I was going to get them to get on board and the distributors to get on board, I was going to have to say, okay, if I put my solution on top of what they're already doing, you're going to make more money, distributor. And then what I did was on the farm through demo plots, I had to create demand at the farm level and pull it through the channel. So do the work for the channel for them. And by showing that there's a higher ROI. So the success back in AgriQuest days was because of the products that we developed, was because we showed the return on investment to the grower and also a profitable product, a good margin to the distributor. So along that chain. And I was obsessed with getting information about how much our product would increase the yield. So the number of extra boxes of lettuce or extra boxes of marketable strawberries from our product. Serenade, it was a fungicide at the time for controlling leaf spots and mildews and such. And so got quantitative data, which was showing to the farmer that and the distributor that this product was providing a monetary benefit, not just that it was environmentally friendly, because they're not going to buy on the environmental friendliness, they're going to buy on that it's going to be something that's going to be monetarily beneficial. That's key. And then of course that attracted investors because I was able to talk in that language. And that's still true today, very much so, with Marone Bio showing the return on investment to the grower and how you sell the product.
Totally. Awesome. I love that. So still kind of staying in this startup phase, and we'll kind of move up your experience into scaling and then kind of the IPO and fundraising process, but still thinking in this startup phase. You mentioned if you were to go kind of do it again, that there's maybe some things that you would be doing differently. As you look back to particularly that like startup phase, maybe before your first couple rounds of financing, what were some of those key learnings that you would have applied, and maybe something that you would have set up differently when that organization, where it took on that own organism itself? Is there anything that you would have done differently in that phase?
Well, it's true of I advise a lot of entrepreneurs and they all have the same issues, and that is people. And, when people go to, I didn't go get an MBA, but if I had to do it all over again, we're younger, I would have, but, learned it on the fly. But they don't often teach you in business school. They teach you finance and marketing and things, that the number one reason for failures in business is around people. So I made mistakes all along the way in who I hired. And so, and which board members and which investors I picked. So those are, sometimes I didn't have a choice which investors because I take the money, but now there's a lot more choices. But I actually, Marone Bio, I turned away money because from some very big venture capitalists, because I said they're just not going to be right. And I want to have ones that are sharing the same values. And so it really comes down to the people. They really make or break the startup. So in the early stages of both companies, I made mistakes there. Yeah, for sure.
And is that something that when you look at that, is that something that's more, and you mentioned values, is that values based? Is it from not maybe having a certain technical skill or having a diverse team, and maybe in terms of like finances and technical and business, or what was that kind of shift that you would make? It's
much less about the particular skill and more about, will they fit in the culture and the values that you're creating. And in all the companies I set we had the founding team had a mission, vision, and values exercise, and then wanted to hire people to stay true to that. But that's where it went awry over time, is that as the company got bigger, there were pockets of aberrant culture that was created. And there's actually a whole science of this. I took a class with a professor who researched her whole career, cultural drift, it's called. And so you have a very influential scientist, entrepreneur, or salesperson or whatever, and then people are gravitate towards that charismatic person, and then there's this pocket that can be very good, but it could also create a pocket that is counter to the kind of culture that you want, and it's very difficult to change that. And so without exiting the people out. So what I learned is that as the founder and CEO, you have to be always vigilant about that in the culture and doing things. You have to be actively managing the culture. When you're off raising money and getting products to market and all these things, and you're so busy and stretched all the time managing a board, you don't think about that and you don't spend enough time with that. And that's really one of the key learnings.
Love it. Yeah, no, I think that culture is a super key thing. And I know you know Dale Carlsen, and that's certainly something that he's kind of ingrained in our work and how we work with students, certainly at the Carlsen Center. And is that something where when you would you do like an annual retreat with a certain of your leadership team to form that kind of culture? And how often did the values ever change, or were those things that stayed the same, or what did that look like in practice?
Good question. Yeah, we actually had quarterly meetings with employees, and got the values out and said, okay, which of the values that we're which of the values that we are still weak on in terms of adhering to? What would you like to see more of us doing on those values, and which are the ones that we're really good on? And to my surprise, the first time I did that exercise at Marone Bio, the one we were weakest on was having fun. So that prompted me creating an employee committee to come up with ways to have more fun.
There you go. The fun committee sounds like a good one to be on.
Yeah. And and that was really good check-in every quarter to say, okay, have we moved the needle, and do we still need work on those areas? And then I instituted employee surveys, suggestion boxes, and other ways to get feedback in addition. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I think culture feeds into this kind of next question, and this comes from our conversation when we're talking about your kind of scale process. So moving from the startup to now I'm starting to grow, a key component was the hires, which we kind of talked about, but maybe hiring to that particular growth. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit of maybe how you manage that from a strategy lens of, hey, we're starting to really ramp up, we've got funds and we're going to be scaling. And then also from kind of that culture and managing that process as you're bringing on new team members. Was that part of the filtering process, or were people attracted to that as well?
Yeah, there's a different type of person who can stomach the risk profile of a startup versus the next phase, where you're well funded and you want to introduce systems and processes that are necessary for scale. But what I learned is that hiring people from big companies, because you think that they know how to scale, was actually a mistake. Because if you lose the entrepreneurial, innovative, creative part of the culture, it's not good. Then politics and the things that I don't like about a big company. I'm saying big companies are great. I mean, they're obviously rule the world, but they're not as good as small companies at innovations and startups and entrepreneurs at innovation. So what you don't want to do then is, because you think you need people who come from big companies, is then pack in your scaling phase your management team or your company with or board with people from those big companies. And what I found is that a lot of people from big companies delegate down. So if they have a title of director or vice president or executive vice president, they delegate down to worker bees who do the work. But when you're in a startup, you need people who do the work. And so you need people who know how to get a product out the door and all the steps. And so if they've delegated all of that, then they actually don't know the steps in getting a product out to the door, or manufacturing a product, or actually, actually making the product, because it's much smaller, or they need a lot more resources to be able to do something. So it's nice to have some people from large companies, because they do know the processes and systems and so forth, but you cannot forget your entrepreneurial, innovative, creative roots, or the company will not succeed or grow as fast as you want, because the politics will and the things that drag down a startup will start coming with that scale.
Such great points. Really key learning. So one, I wanted to go back to, you mentioned from the startup to the scale phase, that people, maybe at that scale phase did not have the stomach or the risk profile to maybe, or at the scale phase, didn't have the risk profile to take on the startup phase. Were there incentives or programs that you instituted to incentivize people to hop in at an earlier stage, whether that's through equity or certain things like that, that incentivize them to join? And, for our founders in the space, how might they set up that structure as they go?
Well, the classical incentive, of course, is stock options. And we gave everybody in the company stock options, and it actually did work, because we went public, and then a lot of the employees did very well by selling their stock when they were allowed to after the lockup, because the stock had soared pretty high, and none of us in management until recently, in order to pay my taxes on my retirement stock, I didn't sell a single share of Marone Bio, and that's because I couldn't. And so, as a founder, it's or in the management team, it's pretty crummy, because you can never get your benefit of all the hard work, but the employees could, so I still think stock options are a great motivator, depending on the stage of the company. Yeah, it's tough as a public company, because the volatility of a small cap stock like Marone Bio, a person comes in one day and the stock is $1.10 that day, and they get their stock options at $1.10. The next week the stock is 80 cents, and then it might go up to $1. It bounces around. It's really a nightmare to be a microcap stock, and the volatility and the manipulation of the stock is very difficult. So that becomes tougher in the sphere that Marone Bio is right now. So it's not as meaningful as it was in the early days of stock options. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And a question, some more practical on the stock options. What was your kind of vesting schedule for that? Was that, what was kind of the time that they needed to stay with the company?
It was 4 years with a 1-year cliff. So they if they left within less than a year, they didn't get anything. And then it was then after 1 year that they would get something. And so that's how it worked out. And now going back to, so what can you do to incentivize a company that's public like Marone Bio now, where the stock is so volatile? Instead of options, more restricted stock or RSUs are being given, and so you're actually getting the stock, and then it doesn't vest until you leave, and so that's another way to do it when the company's a later stage.
Gotcha. Thank you. So the last question on this before we go to kind of my next section, which will be scientist turned fundraiser. So talking about how you raise some capital. But you mentioned a big part of that scale phase was hiring the right talent, and you shared some great insights around, not hiring necessarily from big companies, because there's sometimes a lack of the entrepreneurial spirit and not as much maybe innovation sometimes that comes from that. I'm curious of kind of of where did you find the entrepreneurial talent or spirit? Were those from other startups? Were they from, college students? Where were you finding these individuals?
Yeah, because our industry was not mature yet, it was really difficult. Because I was ahead of the industry, creating an industry. It was hard to hire from folks who were entrepreneurial who had background in biological pest management. So we ended up doing a lot of hiring from large companies, which had mixed results over both AgriQuest and Marone Bio. But what's happening late now, and I found is that now as more and more companies biological companies and startups are scaling in our industry, now we can hire a pool of people who actually have a background in this, and not just from the chemical side, but ended up particularly on R&D and sale. R&D hired hired interns in the lab, and then often mostly from UC Davis, and then the best ones we would hire, and that's the workforce was constant flow from interns to scientists. And then on the sales side and the commercial side, hired right at school. It could be Fresno State or Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, or a number of the universities around, and that had ag curriculum, and often hired them much junior and then trained them, and found, or they might be working for a grower, like actually in-house with the grower, and then hire them and train them, and because if you're working for a large company like Syngenta, your job is to get some market share away from Bayer, your biggest rival. Okay, and they have your territory is a county versus a half of the country, like my salesperson. So or all of California, or northern or southern California, so big territories. So it's a totally different type of person. You have to be a hunter who's gonna convince a farmer that they've got to use a product from a small company in a technology that they may not be familiar with. Totally different kind of person to do that kind of sale. So I found young, energetic people who passionately believed in sustainability to do that, and those who were going to be able to get in the car and drive a lot of miles or fly and meet the customers, to do that.
Love it. And yeah, I like the intern to scientist and how you built that kind of intentional pipeline. And I imagine that got them into your culture at an earlier stage and allowed you to build that going forward. And maybe we'll give a little plug to check out that federal work study program that UC Davis shared, that could be a good place to find some talent and build that pipeline for your own startup.
Yeah, the big challenge was keeping people, though, because once we train them and they're with the company 3 years, unless you have a really clear career development pathway for young people, they're going to leave for something that they think is going to give them more skills, more training, better opportunity. So that's something we really had to focus on deliberately at Marone Bio in order to not be just boot camp for biologicals. We were training everybody for the industry. I didn't want to be the feeder for the industry for my competitors.
You could have started a recruiting business.
But I would hound the managers to constantly to work, and HR to work on those and get a lot more training. So because you're a small company, you don't have a lot of resources, but we had to do that, and we put in a whole LinkedIn learning program and a bunch of things because skill development was really what was most important and to the employees. Yeah,
that's awesome. Such a good point, and it's just as attracting, retaining, and that keeping that talent and helping grow them within the organization. So such a key component to scaling. So want to transition our conversation to what we talked about, kind of the scientist turned fundraiser. You've had your fair share of fundraising. I think from our conversation, you said you raised over $300 million in funding. Is that correct? Or
That's
you
correct.
can tell me if you have
When
a more exact
that I added up, it comes to about 300 million.
There you
Yeah.
go. So you've had your fair share of experience in this space, and so wanted to just get in kind of your head a little bit in terms of what was that transition from a scientist into a fundraiser, and how did you kind of go about doing that? There's some level of persona shift, and maybe was that something that was innate in you, or did you go and learn some tools and skills around that process?
Back then when I started fundraising for AgriQuest, they didn't have all the incubators and accelerators and things like the Carlsen Center. So I was on my own, but in Silicon Valley, Wilson Sonsini, big law firm, had a boot camp and taught you all the mechanics of fundraising. So, the term sheet and so forth, and emphasized getting a good lawyer. Of course, they wanted them themselves to be hired. Having a lawyer who understood equity and so forth. But at the end of the day, it comes down to your personality. And I found out that it's really a sales process. And so you have to be a really good salesperson. And so a salesperson has a pipeline of sales leads, right? And they're always managing that pipeline, and some fall out, and you get new ones. If you're going to hit your sales target, then you've got to have a big enough pool of people that you're calling on, because some are going to reject you and you have to go back to them. And so really, I managed a pipeline just like a salesperson would manage their customer pipeline. And that is how I succeeded and worked. And because it was agriculture, where there are now a lot of venture capitalists and private equity going into this area, but back then there was almost nobody. So I had to work really hard to have a pool of hundreds of potential investors to find the few that would invest, and that's how I did it. But that's still true today for anyone looking for money. And that's the process. You can make it a clinical process in how you approach fundraising, and it should be just like for sales. You need to have a process as well to be a very good, successful salesperson. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, Jeff, noting the mechanics, and part of where my mind went was from an investor on the other side. If you have all those elements lined up, right, once you maybe get to due diligence, that process might go a little bit faster, since you have certain things in order in terms of checking those boxes that Wilson Sonsini had, and it makes you look like a sweeter deal, perhaps, in terms of that sales process. Is there any, when you kind of look at that sales process of fundraising, would you say there's kind of core elements? Obviously, you could say there's prospecting and nurturing and all that type of stuff. But when you look at that process, was there any core elements of, I would do cold outreach to a certain number of people, or I would leverage my network in this way? What did that kind of look like to you in terms of process?
It's interesting because they would always tell you that you shouldn't cold call investors. I cold called investors all the time and was very successful like that. Nowadays, you probably don't have to do that as much, but I mean, a referral is better. But remember, I was like one woman, and there were no other women. And so I stood out. And so interestingly, the VCs, some really venerable VCs in Silicon Valley, who is this woman calling me out of the blue? And they'd take my call, and that one thing led to another, and that's how I got my first round of financing at AgriQuest, was through Don Valentine, a venerable VC, now retired from Seven Rosen Funds, and he referred me to Wayne Silby, the chairman of Calvert Social Ventures, the Bill Calvert Fund, and then they have a venture arm, and then he referred me to the Investor Circle, which was the first ever network for socially responsible investors. And I said, well, you got to be in business at least a year. So once you're in business a year, come back, and then you can pitch to our group. And and ended up getting Rockefeller and Company as the lead investor. And that's how I raised money at AgriQuest, was through a cold call. So I think you have to be bold. And I get a lot of people contacting me through LinkedIn, just out of the blue, and then we'll do things together. So a lot of times entrepreneurs don't have the network yet, particularly women, minorities, you know, so they may have to do some of that cold calling.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. And even that example, right? It didn't just happen from that initial connection. It was like, you know, talk to us when you've been in business for a year. And I imagine a year on the dot, it was like, hey, here, I'm giving you a.
That's exactly what I did. Okay, I'm back.
I'm back and yeah, I'm ready to bring on some money for sure.
And that's really the important thing, is that I advised Marone. She was funded recently by SAC Angels. And she really understood the value of the relationship building. So you know, she'll contact various investors, or they'll contact her or whatever, and she'll ask them, what are the milestones that I need to have that you want to see in order to fund my Series A? You know, that's what you, so rather than just hit them up, okay, you know, right off, you know, and because no investor likes to be hit up immediately. They want to get to know you and develop a relationship. And so you can use them for advice, ask them for advice, just like Fatma does. And you get and I've sat in on some of those calls, and you get some very excellent advice. So then I know as an advisor, okay, Fatma, I need to help you with this, and this, that this, you know, investor said you need to do. And so that I did that also at AgriQuest and Marone Bio, same process of asking what those milestones needed to be.
Love it. That was actually my next question was going to be around you've raised capital at all those stages, and that's one of the things that I see with a lot of entrepreneurs is they're, you know, in their decks they'll put, you know, I'm raising $500,000 and I'm going to use the funds this way in terms of hires, but what's missing a lot of the times is, well, what does that unlock for you in terms of your strategic milestone to get to the next, you know, goal that you're working towards? And so from your experience, and maybe you can use one company as an example, but do you remember the key kind of milestones you're working towards at some of those stages, and if there were any in particular that you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, so for Marone Bio, the investment bankers told us we had to have our two products that were pending at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, because we're in a regulated industry, had to be approved. And then they wanted to see us have a deal with a large company to give us credibility. And so, you know, we planned that out so that we could tick down those milestones. And then that was for the IPO. Earlier, it was a similar kind of thing. Okay, do you have a product? Have you demonstrated the efficacy of your product? That your product is effective? Do you have any customers who want to use it? So names, they want to talk to some growers. And have you successfully been able to scale? The scaling in manufacturing is a huge risk. And then they want to see it submitted or approved by the EPA, by the regulatory agency. So areas of risk, the investors don't like the risk, so they want you to overcome those risks. And I'm advising a startup now, and he says, you know, what did the investors tell you? And he said, well, we want to know that the regulatory process is going to be, you know, not too onerous. So those are the types of milestones that we in all stages of the companies had to tick off. Yeah.
And just one of the things, we talk about is, you know, from an early stage, it's sometimes the risk you're looking at de-risking for your investor is what you're creating desirable. So is there and the customer and problem you're solving, to then the feasibility, which you're speaking to of, you know, will the EPA approve this? Is there efficacy in the product? And then, you know, on the back end, is it actually viable in terms of, you know, can you make money at a sustainable way to grow the venture? So,
the industry I'm in right now is so competitive now that the investors are looking very closely at the technology and the technology differentiation, because they know that the market question is less severe than it was when I was doing it. So is there a market for it? Yes, there is a market for it, but how are you differentiating from somebody else? Because there's so many new entrants in this market. So that's what's going on in my industry right now. Yeah.
Just a couple more questions on this fundraising. I was thinking of all those stages. Was there one in particular that was the hardest to raise for? And if so, what was kind of the reasoning? Why? Was it because of the milestone or the ambiguity of the early stage process? What did that look like to you?
Well, it was just the times.
Yeah.
Back when I was raising for AgriQuest, it just took a very, very long time. So it took 2 years to raise the first round. And so we did friends and family first, 2 rounds of friends and family. And then finally got the company to a point where we had that validation. So Rockefeller came in and our Series A after the Investor Circles Venture Fair. When we had data, I had a friend at Gallo Vineyards, and he allowed us, we had discovered a microbe, a bacteria that could spray on the vines and it would control mildews. And he let us spray some of his very high-end vines, and got these beautiful photos showing before and after spraying with no mildew and no mildew, and use that to raise the round. And that was validation from for Rockefeller that we actually had something, and they put in the money in the Series A. But it's I think that from all the companies I've advised, the first round, once you're past the friends and family, that first institutional Series A, finding a lead is really the hardest. That's the toughest. Yeah.
So the last thing on fundraising, is there anything you'd want to share that maybe we haven't talked about on that kind of fundraising process at all? Is there anything that I might have missed asking you about?
Yeah, so it always takes longer than entrepreneurs think it will, always, and much longer. So you have to plan it out, and don't ever be up against a wall. So plan it out such that, because if you're up against a wall, you're never going to get good terms from an investor. So, you know, if you're running out of money in 2 months or 6 months or whatever, they're gonna ask your financials and know exactly when you run out of money. So you have to plan that. And then you know, it's a marriage. So when you bring an investor in, you're married to them. So you better choose wisely, and have a very good lawyer to navigate the term sheet, and not put in draconian things like multiple liquidation preferences or full ratchets. Avoid those like the plague, and make sure you have a backup plan, backups to backups. If you think your investor is all ready to sign, they may not. I had a large, well-known Silicon Valley venture capital group putting in 20 million in Marone Bio back in 2010-11 timeframe, and the week we were supposed to close, pulled out. Okay, so you got to have backups to backups. And what's your, many times I've been faced where you think you're gonna get the deal and you don't. So it's not till the money's in the bank. So
the points that I pulled was it takes longer than you think to raise the capital. So plan it out, and if you're raising it, you know, right at the time that you really need money, that can dramatically impact the terms that you have as the as a founder or early stage venture. Certainly, it's a long-term engagement and could be compared to a marriage for sure. And then having a good lawyer to really help you navigate that process. And one recommendation, I just listened to the book Secrets of Sand Hill Road, and talks a lot about those various terms. And so gets you kind of understanding what all of the agreements are and what that will allow you to do, especially in terms of liquidation preferences and all those things. And then lastly was have backups to your backups, because the deal's not done until the money's in the bank. So thank you for
those. Have you ever seen the show Silicon Valley?
I have. It's a hilarious one.
It's really good because each, the episodes will cover some of these different things. Like one episode is the term sheet.
Right. Totally. It's a great show indeed. Awesome. So I have kind of one more segment, and really just kind of have one question there, and then some general wrap up questions, and then we'll go to Q&A. So hopefully everyone's preparing their questions. And this one's kind of just around the IPO. And it's really kind of going back to when you were starting the company. Was that part of your initial exit strategy, or was this one that you were thinking of originally getting acquired by a larger corporation, or what did that look like when you were starting out the company? And is that something you were looking to do?
Yeah, your goal, of course, is to create a great company, rather than creating it for an exit. But when you take investors' money, you have to create one for an exit. Right. So yes, you have to always be thinking about how those investors are going to get their exit, and it's either selling or IPO. We actually had several offers for the company, Marone Bio, way back when, turned them down and went public instead. The investors did turn them down and went public instead. Thought they could get a better deal going public, and being public is no cakewalk. And so it's been a real challenge. So was that the right decision? Maybe yes, maybe no. I think probably yes, because the company had the more freedom to innovate and take this industry further along. I don't think that could have happened under the auspices of a big company back then, where I've seen a number of big companies just sit on technology. So I think it was probably the right decision. But it's we actually went public in 2013, but started planning in 2011, and met bankers and did the first bank off with investment bankers in 2011, and then they gave us the milestones we needed to achieve. So we had a management retreat, and we mapped out every quarter what we were going to achieve until we could get in order to get to the IPO. And so it was a very deliberate process, and that's what it requires. It's very rigorous. Yeah, the investment bank basically turns you upside down and wants to know every single thing and document everything about you, and you have to validate everything. And I had notebooks and notebooks. It's just before we had everything digital, but everything you say about your business, you have to have a reference to back up. So it's fact checking. Yeah, I guess, and so they have to fact check everything. So you have to provide the backup for everything. So I had that all in big fat notebooks.
That doesn't sound like the most fun.
Yeah.
Is there, I have kind of one wrap-up question, which is just more general, but is there anything else on the IPO process? I know there's probably many things, and maybe some of the entrepreneurs are a ways away from that, but is there any kind of key learnings that you'd like to share about that outside of the notebooks on notebooks of references to back up your references?
Well, there's positives in that you can raise money really quickly. And literally, there's something called an overnight offering. I literally practically did an offering overnight. And so, I mean, it's very, very much faster than doing the private. But right now, the small cap segment is really suppressed, and the large caps are just put your money in S&P and whatever, or the FANG stocks or whatever. But the small caps are really down and out. So it can be really tough if you're at a time when money is not being cycled back into a small cap stock. And it's really critical to go public when there's an open window. And there's been an open window for a long time. And if Origin Materials went public via SPAC, and SPACs they were really popular. They're cooling down a bit, but so because of the rigor and the time it takes and it cost several $1 million to take a company public, the SPACs, special purpose acquisition vehicles, they call them, special purpose acquisition corporations, they call them, is a faster way to go. You can go to public in 3 to 4 months. I joined the board of a 180 Life Sciences, an anti-arthritic drug company that went public via SPAC. And it was not easy, but it certainly was a faster way to go than if they had to do the old-fashioned way. So it's great that the general public can created the first independent biologicals company public that the public can buy. That's really cool. So that's a positive. You can raise money quickly. Negative is the rigors of you have to have perfect financials, perfect. Because if there's any mistake, you have a material weakness or a significant deficiency, and that means your stock will go down dramatically if you have those types of errors. So the rigor of it and the cost is several $1 million to have the directors and officers insurance and the finance team to make sure you have perfect financials, and the auditors. So the rigor of it isn't for the faint of heart, but at the same time, as I said, you can have the profile that you wouldn't have before, and the easier money raising.
Definitely. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we have one hand up, but the last question I have is is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience before I kind of turn it over to the Q&A, anything along your entrepreneurial journey? And then also, what can this community do to support you as well?
Well, I think that this is the better time than ever to be an entrepreneur, and especially in this region, because we're developing an infrastructure like the Carlsen Center and things going on at UC Davis and StartupSac and AgStart and all kinds of things. So we're getting momentum in this region, and I think it's a really good place to be an entrepreneur. So anybody with a passion and it really takes a lot of passion to be an entrepreneur. And so with passion and a great idea that has been validated and vetted with a bit of customer research, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me, and I know we have some questions in, so we'll turn it over to the first hand that's raised is Thor. So feel free to take the mic and ask a question, and then if you do want to ask questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or raise your hand, and we can go from there. So go ahead, Thor.
All right, thanks. Hi, Pam, again. So I'm wondering, one of the big issues that I always am thinking about is sequencing, sort of which things you need to do now, kind of ordering your to-do list, right? But there's a theoretical good way, and then there's what's immediate to you. And within that space of questions, the big question I had was, what's one of the first things that you guys invested in, that the firm invested in, that you found was of good value in like the first 3-5 years, that was something that maybe was out of sequence of what you would think I need to do this or I need to do that, but you decided to invest in this thing over here, and that ended up turning out to be of really good value?
I advise a lot of startups, and some don't have a CFO. And I invested in a CFO from day one for both companies. And I think that was one of the most valuable things, because it just created structure, and the CFO also did a lot of the operations side. So I had that. So then that was able to free me to do the salesy stuff and money raising and such. Well, so I think some people delay too long in having that CFO position, and also a professional board. I had a professional board from day one, both places, and I think that really helped. So those are some of the things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good question, Thor. All righty. Was there any thrown?
I think Laura had a question earlier on, if nobody else has raised their hand.
Sure. Do you want to ask it, Laura? I know there was a lot thrown in the chat, so.
Yeah, just me giving my commentary. What I was curious about, Pam, there's a big focus on culture in companies and in startups. How do you know when you're big enough to start, really honing your culture? Like if you're two co-founders, and I mean, that just seems kind of early to officially sit down and figure out what your culture is. When would you say you're at that point where it's time to start, really getting that on paper and making sure that you're making good decisions?
Two co-founders.
Okay.
Because you set the tone. If you two co-founders have to decide that, and are you actually aligned on that as co-founders? I've had co-founders who are not. And so get that down so that everybody coming in from that point, whether it's an investor, advisor, board member, or employee, is then you use that as your filter
Mhm.
And just from day one, absolutely, because that's you're an entrepreneur is passionate about what they're doing, and they're doing it. Your whole being is involved, and that's so fundamental that you have to have that mission, vision, and values done right from day one.
Okay, thanks.
So it looks like we have a raised hand. Robert, take it away. You're muted, Robert.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, two questions. One is sort of a continuation of this culture thing, and the second one relates to, I guess I put on the labor of social media in agriculture. When Pam, did you really develop the culture at your first firm?
So Entertech was Danish, so the Novo Nordisk culture was imposed upon us. But AgriQuest, we spent a lot of time on that. I spent a lot of time on that. I mean, we literally, I had a head of product development and a CFO, and the three of us and same with Marone Bio when I first brought in Julie Morris, who was our first CFO, and a couple more. Our head of R&D and let's see, head of marketing. We at the early stage, we actually had this exercise where we spent a half a day with sticky big sheets and sticky things and whatever, and mapping out the values and the culture statements and so forth. So
did you get it right? Did you get it right, or did you?
Yes, we did. So the absolutely. So I look back and I have saved all the original culture statements with Marone Bio, and they've evolved a little bit, but not that much. They're the same now. Unfortunately, I made mistakes in hiring people who then veered the company into a different direction, and then I've had to right the ship. So, yeah.
Okay, and then agriculture is made up of a population of folks that are both politically and business orientation conservative, but they're in a business where they're taking monumental risks. I mean, there are just so many ways the train can get off the tracks, and they're geographically dispersed. You talked about reaching them essentially with direct sales. Will you get on a plane? Will you, if you're a big company, you can focus on a county. But could you talk about social media? Is it a reasonable way to get over those geographic barriers and ways of doing business barriers?
Yeah, it is now. It wasn't back then. So we had to do a lot more face-to-face. But and COVID showed us we can do sales and ag also via webinar and so forth digitally. But there's nothing better than actually visiting someone on the farm. I'm going to visit. I'm so excited. On Friday, I'm going to be at a North Carolina sweet potato grower who is the largest organic sweet potato grower in the country and is using a lot of Marone Bio products. So I'm excited. There's nothing better than talking to a customer in person because it's just energizes you and you learn so much. But social media, I'm big. If you know, I always posting on Twitter and LinkedIn. And so the statistic is that 80% of US growers have a smartphone, not just a cell phone, a smartphone. And in Pakistan, only 25% of farmers have a smartphone. So, but expect over time in the developing countries that everybody will have a smartphone over time. So everything going to doing ag business is going to be done digitally on your phone, your smartphone. And yes, there's a lot of farmers on social media. A lot of farmers follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. We have conversations back and forth, and it's great. It's great. So highly recommend. And early adopters, particularly, and depending on the crops, the cannabis growers are all on Facebook and Instagram. Okay, and so they're very active on social media. Even But everybody's on a lot of farmers are on LinkedIn. A lot of them use Twitter, but yeah, definitely you can reach customers that way. Absolutely.
One way to put content up on social media is retweeting, but for original content, where do you find your best ideas?
I read a tremendous amount, so I subscribe to an enormous number of newsletters and journals and so forth. And so I will. There are competitors, my competitors, employees that my competitors tell me that my feed is where they get their information from because they don't get it from their own company. And so I post things about sustainable ag and organic ag and climate smart ag and so forth and biologicals and then make comments once in a while and start dialogues with people once in a while, or ask people's opinion on what do you think of this article. If you're in ag, if you look at Semiosis, SEMIOS, Semiosis LinkedIn feed, it is second to none. And they have something like 14,000 followers, and they are heavily packed with grower content. So they talk about the phase of the crop. They talk about what the pest is doing. So they really are careful. The head of sales does it, James Watson, and occasionally the CEO, but the head of sales does it. And it is the best example of how you can reach your customers with very timely information about what's going on in the field at the time. Yeah.
Okay, one last one. Who are your heroes?
Who are my heroes? Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is my hero. I would say that's number one for now.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Jeff has a question in the chat.
I'll just ask it. So you mentioned or alluded to a lot of changing technology in social fabric of society. With all the new changes in technology and rapidly accelerating changes, what are some opportunities that you see for startups and innovation, and maybe in ag and maybe broader too?
Yeah, there's a dramatic change going on in ag and food, in many industries, healthcare, where AI, digital, big data. There's so much technology being applied. So there's a convergence of tech and biology in all these industries. And so, in healthcare, they're able to scan images, breast images with AI and detect breast cancer so much faster than doctors can do by reading a film or looking at a digital. And so just in any industry, and then AI in food and ag to screen foods for nutritional content or whatever. And Cornell now has a robot going down in the soil to look in the soil and map what's going on in the soil for soil health. So the speed of change of implementation of digital AI, big data, bioinformatics, in all of the main industries is just astonishing. So we truly are going to have a digital farm, and the farmers are now doing so many things from their computers instead of walking the fields, flying drones over and scouting things, and so and food tech, same. So there's just so many problems to solve still. We have too much food waste. We have still too many foodborne pathogens. We still have too many people who don't have enough to eat. We still have poorly nutritious food and not enough nutritious food in the U.S. and too much processed. I mean, there's so many things. Healthcare, in the healthcare side, there's a lot of ways we deliver healthcare that's still just backwards, and diagnosis of diseases and discovery of there's so many things. anyway, those are things I know about.
So we'll give a minute.
So if you want to find a good idea of something, is look at what, focus from the problem, what is the problem that needs to be solved, and where are the pain points of where something is really inefficient and needs a new solution. And in any industry, really, there's just so many opportunities there. Yeah.
So while I think some other people are getting some questions, I'll do another question for you. And I'm thinking, because you're currently serving as an advisor, I think, to a few startups, or at least one. And so I'm curious of your own experience as a startup. What did you kind of look for in that advisory role, and what role did that kind of play in your startup journey as you're getting going? So if you're thinking of, for the people here that are starting up, what role did that advisory role play for you in getting going?
My dog has just come in the house and is running around like a crazy dog.
What type of dog do you got?
It's a Pekingese mix. Gosh, it's got a toy making noise. Oh my God.
Well, that's all good. My pup's she's probably whining as well, so I can empathize with the puppies.
I had them outside, and my husband let them in. Now they're going crazy. There's a lot of people who will offer advice, but don't want to really work. So you've got to find advisors who will truly work for you, and not just a big name. A lot of people today say, I'll get calls and they say, we just want to put your name. It could be anywhere in the world. For me, they'll say, well, we just want to, we're raising money. We just want to put your name on there, for credibility. I go, no, no. If I'm going to advise you, I'm going to really truly work and want to help build the value, and that's it. Because there's so many people who want to, want to get some stock or stock options or a stipend or whatever, and the prestige of being on your board or as an advisor, and without actually doing the work. And so that's the key: is are they going to really work hard for you and really open up their Rolodex and help you in the network. The network that they have is really critical. The number one thing that someone asked me to do is, can you introduce me to XYZ? That's really it. Can you open the door for me?
Right. So there was a question in the chat from Thor, and then we'll go to Laura's hand raised. So the question from Thor is, did you ever feel burnout, dissatisfaction with the industry? And if so, what did you do to get through it?
So many times, and so many times. And it wasn't that long ago. I was appointed to chlorpyrifos is a toxic chemical, and I was appointed to the chlorpyrifos alternative task force by state of California, and they're banning this chemical, and then the group has to come up with alternatives. And oh my gosh, I thought after this was a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, but I thought after all this time we are further along in the conversation about the need to change to a more sustainable agriculture, but the entrenched interests were all in the room, and I'm going like, so dragging me down. And I was this lone voice, no. And they're still talking about how biologicals don't work. And so, there's even today, but there's many, many times along the way where there were tremendous barriers. The Environmental Protection Agency under Obama appointed somebody who was head of the biopesticide division who was negative to biologicals. He was from some radiation branch or something. And he actually didn't understand biology. So he thought microbes, just because they were alive, were inherently unsafe. I said, well, do you eat yogurt? Do you eat cheese? I mean, do you actually live? Because there's microbes all over your body. But anyway, so as an entrepreneur, you have to overcome those barriers, whatever it takes. So I hired a lobbyist with the best $100,000 I ever spent. And they got me access to all of our legislators who sat in meetings with the EPA every single time, and then called them up to the Hill to speak before the House, the Senate Ag Committee, to talk about why they were killing jobs, because this was 2008, and they were crushing small companies because they were slowing down the speed of getting the products approved, and ended up that changed the whole system of how they did their job. and got things back on track. And I said it was the best $100,000 I ever spent, but it's just an example of so many times along the way, there were barriers, but, and you want to give up all the time. And there's many times I was curled up on the couch. My husband would roll me off the couch and say, go take a run, go swim, to get out of that, you know?
Awesome. Thank you. Great question. Thank you for the honest answer, Pam. Appreciate that. And then Laura, your question.
Yeah, so Pam, one of the things I hear from early stage entrepreneurs who are starting to talk to investors about fundraising, they get frustrated because they get all kinds of advice from the investors, and frequently it's like competing advice. And so they want to know, you know, what should I do? This investor's telling me this, this other one's telling me that. It looks like you're familiar with it. And I wonder, what would be your advice to entrepreneurs when they encounter this kind of frustration?
Oh gosh, I was frequently whipsawed about, oh my, it was like, okay, ping pong. This one said this one said the opposite. And that happens so often. And you have to talk to enough people where there's some pattern recognition, where you start seeing trends in what they're saying. But at the end of the day, you really have to go like with what you, maybe they're wrong, you know, maybe they're really truly wrong, and you have to go with what you think is right. But hopefully there is some of that pattern recognition where, you know, maybe 60% of them will set it one way, or 70%, and you'll start seeing some themes. But if not, and it's totally truly opposite, and you can't resolve it, then it really comes down to if you have enough data of your own to support your position. I'm a scientist, which is really helpful as an entrepreneur. It's been a noose around my neck being a scientist, but at the same time, it's why I'm successful, because I was data driven. And if you have enough data, then you can make a decision, without just your gut. Gut's helpful. Your gut is very helpful, but it's data driven gut decision making.
Yeah. I love that you said, you know, get enough data points to see a pattern. I was speaking with an entrepreneur just a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me that investors think such and so or whatever, and it just didn't sound right to me. I'm like, you know, well, how many investors have you talked to? 2. You talked to 2 investors. I'm like, you know, that's not enough to understand a trend or a pattern. You really need to talk to a lot more people before. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Just as your customers, when I talk to my customers, and I talked to 2 of them, and I'm making this solution.
Well, there's nothing better than talking to customers, that's for sure. Yeah, that's so for the NSF I-Corps program that I went through with Farnham, I was the industry mentor. We had to talk to more than 100. We had to talk to at least 100 customers, or you couldn't get through the program. That was really valuable. It really opened a lot of eyes, opened Farnham's eyes about where they needed to focus, you know, their market efforts. Yeah. So that's definitely worth doing. Yeah.
All right. We'll give it. Jeff, I see you unmuted. Did you have a question, or were you?
I do not. I'm just anticipating coming near the end of the Q&A portion.
There we go.
And wondering another question. That's okay.
Yeah, I want to give anybody another chance. Go for it.
So I think was that
someone? Robert?
I just muted myself again.
Robert and John both have questions.
Does somebody else have a question? If somebody else has, I'll let them go.
Let's go Robert, and then we'll go Thor, and then John.
Okay, this is Robert, and I've got a question about boards and advisory boards. Really quickly, what's a good size, or how do you decide what the right size is? And short list of skill sets that you'd like to see in your board, in addition to being able to network. And then from an advisory standpoint, essentially the same set of questions.
Yeah, most startups today have advisory boards first, and then they have real boards when the investor comes in. But I actually had a real board from day one. And so I was unusual, and I didn't have an advisory board. So, but I had 3, myself and 2 others to start. And I had really good. So for Marone Bio, I had Dick Dorff and Richard Rominger. Richard Rominger, both of them have passed away in 2020, unfortunately. Very, very wonderful, dear people who shared the values and really just genuine, nice people who, you know, had a network of people and who they were just so respected in their fields, and lacking the ego that you see from, you know, some investors that so it's really important to find those kind of, and you know, it's really important to have your board created before you bring in investors, because if you may not get who you want, and they may not want you to have those people on your board first. Well, if you haven't created one and you're creating it, the first board, when you bring in your first investor, they may not give you the freedom that you need to create the board you want. So you better start that before. I mean, you can have both an advisory board and a fiduciary board, but better have your fiduciary board before you take your first dollar of non-friends and family money. So, and the characteristics: low ego, low politics, somebody who's not going to threaten you as the founder and want to take your job. Really important. There are a lot of those, and can roll up their sleeves and work for you. Yeah.
And an odd number.
Yeah, odd number doesn't. Yeah, you know, it's nice to have an odd number, but you don't have to have an odd number.
Thank you, Robert. All right, so next question was, I think, was it to Thor? Thor, did you have a question? And then we're going John and then Julie.
Yeah, let John and Julie go first, and then
Okay.
if there's enough time, you can get to me.
Perfect. John, take it away.
Well, I just kind of want to wait toward the end, but my startup is in the micromanagement space, and my education and background is coevolution, population biology studies. So, and I have both boards, and have some interesting things going on. And I was wondering if your contact information would be up, and if you'd possibly be available for coffee or lunch, because I'd love to tell you about our project.
I'm putting my contact information in here, and then that's my email. So yes, I'm happy to do lunch, or just my cell phone is there.
Thank you. When you were in Arizona, did you ever run into a guy named Bruce Taboshnik?
I know Bruce Taboshnik.
You know Carol Boggs?
Yes.
Ward Watt?
Who was the third one?
Carol's husband, Ward.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And Paul, and yeah, so I was in their lab. Carol was my advisor in
really? Okay.
In high school. I was in an NSF Science Summer Training Program at the University of Texas. She was my advisor in high school, and then moved to Stanford my freshman year and married Ward that year, and that's how I got to slide into the lab. And I actually published a paper with Bruce.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah.
We have a lot in common. So
I'd love to.
Happy to chat. Okay.
Love to do lunch with you.
Okay,
thank you. Thank you.
Great. I love the connections being made at the startup happy hour. That's where it happens. Absolutely. I love it. All righty, Julie, you're up next.
Thank you. And thanks, Pam, for this. I just maybe doubling down on some of the earlier questions. I really like the tips about what to look for in co-founders and teams. I was curious about what locations, obviously mostly digital at this point in time, do you use to source your co-founders or advisory boards or boards typically?
Yeah, that's a dilemma for I have a friend, a former student extern from Cornell, and then another founder I'm advising. Both have issues with finding co-founders because they have an idea, and then nobody will look at them unless it looks like they have a team. You know, having a team is really, so that's not an easy one, especially because if you don't have money and you're working for just sweat equity at the start. So I don't have real good advice about that because I always had a network of people when I started the companies that I could tap into. Although frankly, I didn't know any of my take that back. I didn't know any of my founding team. Like I met Julie Morris over a networking event for SARTA, the predecessor to StartupSac. Oh my God. And we were both gorging. They had a chocolate fountain that you dip your fruit in, and we were both gorging at this fountain. And then I just chatted, we just started chatting. And then she she was taking a package from Agilent and had a Harvard MBII. And I said, oh, this sounds like somebody that could be great, because the investors love Harvard and Stanford MBAs. So, and she ended up being my first employee and director of finance, and then ultimately CFO. So if you don't have the network and you want to, I think, places like this, and once we get back to in person, just networking, and also LinkedIn is a really good place. I mean, everybody makes connections through LinkedIn. So, yeah.
Awesome, great advice. So I think we'll do our last question here, and Thor, you can wrap us out, and then we'll be good to go.
Okay. It goes a little bit back to asking questions of your customers. And I'm curious, within the ag world, the customers are typically your farmers that you're dealing with, right? But you might have other customers.
They're the end users.
Yes.
But we also have to sell to the distributor, though.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah. You've got to deal with a variety of people here in this. So who are you going to get your data points primarily? And then what are the kinds of metrics you're using when you're creating your sort of survey questions or things like this? Are these discussions with people and you take notes as you take in discussion? You send them a questionnaire and say, hey, what's going on with you this year and blah, 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 blah.
I've done it both ways. So I've hired folks to do formal surveys. And there's some good firms out there, and that was very useful data. But I did face-to-face a lot. I travel with my salespeople a lot, but then also do a lot of my own talking to growers. So even though I sell through distributor, most of my data points came from the grower directly, because they're the end user, and the distributor is not going to be. So I have to create the demand at the grower level and pull it through the distribution channel, because our distributors do not create demand for us. They take the orders, but they don't create the demand. So how to do the demand creation at the grower level. So the end user was ultimately where I had to go. And but no, I some formal market research was very valuable at certain points. But then my own, I needed to hear it directly as well.
Do you feel like when you hear it directly, that just reinforces that you're on the right pathway?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you need enough data points. One customer does not make, that's right. Some people make the mistake of talking to too few. That's why I-Core program requires you to talk to 100, because then you get patterns. You might not need 100. I thought we could have done it with probably 40 with Fatma, but the more the merrier, so then you get that, again, that pattern recognition. So yeah, the data points you need. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap it here for us and just want to say thank you, Pam, for the conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you and learning more about your entrepreneurial experience and going from startup to IPO. And I know there was a lot of great knowledge transfer for all of our entrepreneurs in the space, and appreciate you just being an asset in the community to share your experience and expertise. And so appreciate that. And